On Christmas night in 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, an incident occurred that would go down in American history as one of its most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Even today, nearly 8 decades later, the story of the Sodder children continues to haunt investigators, historians, and anyone who dares to look too closely. This was not just a house fire. This was a disappearance. A mystery wrapped in fear, unanswered questions, and chilling coincidences. George Sodder was a hard-working Italian immigrant who had built a stable life in America. He lived with his wife, Jenny Sodder, and their 10 children in a modest but comfortable home. The family was close-knit, disciplined, and well-respected in their community. George owned a trucking business and was known as a man who spoke his mind. He was openly critical of Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator. Even after moving to America, George never hid his hatred for fascism. Some admired his courage. Others warned him to be careful. Jenny Sodder was a devoted mother and homemaker. She ran the household with strict discipline but deep love. Christmas was especially important to her, a time when the entire family came together. On December 24, 1945, Christmas Eve, the Sodder home was filled with excitement. The children were playing with new toys, laughing, and enjoying the holiday. Nothing about that night suggested it would end in tragedy. Later that evening, 5 of the children went upstairs to sleep in their bedroom. George and Jenny remained downstairs with the younger children, eventually settling in for the night themselves. At around 1 a.m., Jenny suddenly woke up with a strange feeling. She smelled smoke. As she walked toward the kitchen, her fear became reality. A fire had broken out. Flames were already spreading rapidly. George and Jenny acted immediately. They managed to get 4 of their children out of the house and into safety. But when they realized the 5 children upstairs were missing, panic set in. George ran outside to grab the ladder he always kept near the house so he could reach the second-floor window. The ladder was gone. Desperate, George tried another plan. He attempted to use one of his coal trucks to climb up and rescue the children. Shockingly, the truck would not start. He tried the second truck. It also failed. Both trucks had worked perfectly just the day before. Neighbors gathered as flames consumed the house. Several people tried calling the fire department, but no one answered. Phone calls failed again and again. When contact was finally made, the fire department arrived hours later, far too late. By morning, the Sodder home had burned to the ground. Authorities quickly concluded that the 5 children had died in the fire. The case was labeled a tragic accident and was closed. But the Sodder family refused to accept this explanation. There were no remains. No bones. No skull fragments. No teeth. This raised an immediate red flag. Experts later confirmed that even intense house fires do not burn human bones completely. Teeth and calcium-rich bones survive temperatures far higher than what the Sodder house fire could have produced. For 5 bodies to vanish without a trace, the fire would have needed to burn at extreme temperatures for several hours. That did not happen. Forensic analysis confirmed the fire was not long or intense enough to destroy 5 human bodies. George and Jenny rejected the official findings. Authorities claimed the fire was caused by faulty wiring in the kitchen. But George insisted the house had recently been rewired and inspected. No issues had ever been reported. As the family revisited the events of that night, disturbing details began to surface. George remembered trying to call the fire department himself, but the phone line was dead. Investigators later confirmed the phone line had been cut from outside the house. The edges of the wire were smooth, indicating it had been cut with a sharp tool, not damaged by fire. Jenny then recalled something even more unsettling. At around 12:30 a.m., just half an hour before the fire, the phone had rung. On the other end was a strange woman laughing uncontrollably. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. If the phone line was cut by 1 a.m., that meant it had been cut after this call, but before the fire. That same night, Jenny also remembered hearing a loud object hit the roof. When no further sound followed, she dismissed it and went back to bed. Minutes later, the house was on fire. Later, the missing ladder was discovered far away from the house, in a nearby field. Nothing about that night made sense. George became convinced that his children had not died in the fire. They had been taken. But by whom, and why? Months before the fire, an insurance salesman had repeatedly pressured George to insure his house. George refused. During one heated conversation, the agent reportedly threatened him, saying, "You'll regret this when your house burns down." Was this a coincidence, or a warning? Another theory pointed toward George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. Some believed the Italian mafia, loyal to the dictator, may have targeted George as a warning. Witnesses later came forward with shocking claims. One woman said she saw children resembling the Sodder kids staying in a hotel with a strange couple. Another person claimed to have seen children being driven away the night of the fire. 1 year later, investigators quietly admitted their original conclusion was wrong. The fire had been deliberately set. A bus driver passing through Fayetteville that night reported seeing people throw what looked like a fireball onto the Sodder house. After the snow melted months later, investigators found a rubber-like object near the property, believed to be a pineapple bomb, a type of incendiary device. Jenny immediately remembered the sound she had heard hitting the roof. The pieces were falling into place. George and Jenny devoted their lives to finding the truth. They followed leads across the country and hired private investigators. They erected a massive billboard on a nearby highway showing photos of their missing children and offering a reward. Years passed. Then, in 1960, nearly 15 years after the fire, Jenny received a mysterious letter. Inside was a photograph of a young man who looked strikingly similar to her son Louis. Written on the back were the words, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Hope returned." A private detective was sent to investigate the letter's origin. But the trail went cold. Louis Sodder was never found. George Sodder died in 1969, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny remained in the family home for the rest of her life. She built fences, added rooms, and wore black clothing until her death in 1989, a symbol of endless mourning. After her passing, the family finally removed the weathered billboard. Were the Sodder children victims of a tragic accident? Or were they kidnapped as part of a dark and calculated conspiracy? To this day, no definitive answer exists. And perhaps, it never will. As time moved forward, the Sodder case slowly slipped out of official investigations, but it never left public memory. What makes this mystery so unsettling is not only what happened, but what never happened afterward: no arrests, no confessions, no clear answers. Every theory surrounding the case raises more questions than it solves. If the children died in the fire, why was there no physical evidence? If they were kidnapped, how did the perpetrators disappear so completely? And why were so many crucial systems, the phone line, the ladder, the trucks, disabled at the exact same moment? Some researchers believe the truth may have been buried intentionally. Others think the case fell victim to poor investigation standards of the time. And some argue that the answers still exist somewhere, waiting to be discovered by the right person. What remains undeniable is the emotional cost of the mystery. A family was left suspended between hope and grief for decades, unable to mourn properly, unable to move on. The Sodders never had the closure that most families rely on to heal. Cases like this force us to question how many similar stories were lost in history before modern forensic science existed. How many disappearances were labeled accident simply because the truth was too complex or uncomfortable to uncover? The Sodder children became more than a missing person case, they became a symbol of unanswered history. A reminder that sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried. And as long as questions remain unanswered, this mystery will continue to echo through time. We hope you like the Historical Secrets video, and which kind of video you watch. Tell me in comments. See you in the next amazing video.